Namaskar and good evening. Respected senior colleague Naren Singh Tomarji, colleagues in the Council of Ministers Shobhaji and Kailashji, secretaries and officers of the Agriculture Ministry, and also the DFS and NABARD officials who are on the dais, officials who are before me, Pusa's a special place. Coming here gives me great comfort that agriculture and related activities are receiving the due attention that they should receive. I'll start with a remark that Tomarji made. I was going to say it anyway. We owe it to the farmers of this country that even during severe lockdown, it was the rural India, the farming India, the agriculture India, the Kisan India, which kept us going. None of them felt the pressures of the COVID. They took whatever minimum safeguards they should, but ensured that the food safety of this country was kept up, and it was because of that growth in agriculture and also the way in which rural India gave a comfort to the economy. I owe a great deal to the farmers of India, to rural India. So I take this first opportunity that I am in the campus of Pusa and also talking with the agricultural minister and his officials, that India owes great indebtedness to the farmers, particularly the way they stood up during COVID. So I take this opportunity to thank before you all. Today I had, as always, a lot of data to provide, saying our attention to agriculture, because Prime Minister Modi takes a lot of interest in getting into the details to see how best agriculture sector can be strengthened. So he's had several rounds of meetings, of course with agriculture and ministry related to farmers' welfare, but even with us to say, what is your plan? How are you going to go about this? How are we supporting farmers and so on? Now, of course, farmers also mean Pashupalak and also the Matsyakar. So I was going to sort of provide a lot of data on how much attention in terms of providing for funds has been done in the last 7-8 years. But I think that has been fairly covered by Tomarji saying what is the kind of difference in the budget, which is provided for insurance, which is provided for Samman, which is also helping through the NABARD to provide credit that is so required by not just, as I said, farmers, animal husbandry area, and also for fishermen. But what interested me in the presentation was that the sanctioned versus disbursed amounts vary significantly. And it is a very interesting correlation, or call it as an absence of correlation, that when the scheduled commercial banks have lent, they seem to sanction less, but seem to disburse better. Whereas in the cooperative sector, the sanction is higher, but they don't get to see as much disbursal. Ritesh, you should correct me if I'm saying the wrong thing, but your pie chart showed me that. So I take this opportunity being before you to ask Vivek Joshi, the TFS secretary who is with me here now on the dais, to understand what causes this difference between a scheduled commercial bank's loan sanctioning versus disbursement. And that doesn't seem to have a mirror image in terms of cooperative banks. If the psyche of the person who's receiving the loan is the measure with which I need to understand this, it should be the same in both. They get the sanction, but they don't want the dispersal, so they remain quiet. Or they get the sanction and they want to pick it up, and therefore they go insist on getting the dispersal and benefit from it. It can't be the opposite. After all, the universe that is being dealt with is the same farming universe. So I need to understand why there is such a sharp opposite performance between scheduled commercial banks and the cooperatives. I would certainly want this analyzed, and let's say within a month, get the inputs from all the regions, and not just give me, but also inform Minister Tomar as to what is happening here and if there's a way in which we can improve that. Because eventually, money is there, you're sanctioning, but farmers don't seem to get. Is the platform wrong, or is there a methodological problem? So within a month, can I ask Vivek Joshi, please get us something on it. I commend the entire team of Agriculture Ministry, the ministers and the secretaries, that within a matter of 4 months, since after I reviewed the interest subvention, at that time we were trying to get it back. And I distinctly remember that we had more than 1 or 2 meetings to understand as to how we can get it back and ensure that the farmer doesn't take the burden of the extra rate, and also ensure that the subsidy is provided in time and right amount is provided. But the issue is not about the subsidy, issue is not about providing the interest subvention. It is more that the idea that was discussed at that time, that there should be a portal to understand what is the Kisan loan situation like. And within 4 months, by October 22, from the presentation I understand, you've come up with a portal and you've field tested it. You've also seen what kind of information is obtainable from there. After all, as I understand, it is going to be with the banks, cooperative or with the scheduled commercial banks, for them to understand how it works. And real time, we know how many of them have benefited by this interest subvention provided loans. So on this again, I commend the Agriculture Ministry, led by Shri Tomar, for having very quickly responded to it and brought it to fruition, that today you're able to, with confidence, launch it. But even as I say this, and from my reviews earlier, not of agriculture, but of banking, but of cooperatives and so on, and the regional rural banks in particular, I've gone by region to understand as to how the RRBs are functioning. And when I do that, largely, it's the rural economy and their functioning, which obviously implies that the farmers and those who benefit from the rural bank, it is that functioning that I've reviewed. And despite me going to different regions, one fact remains common among all of them, and that is there is still a lot of work to do in digitizing RRBs and digitizing cooperative banks. Cooperative banks I can understand because each cooperative bank's health is different from one another. They're not equally endowed. But there is a massive work going on, and you're aware Prime Minister Modi has started a separate ministry for cooperatives, and since after that, the minister coincidentally the Home Minister who holds the charge, has been ramping up capacities in cooperative banks. And therefore, cooperative banks and their digitization will happen with that necessary speed. But I was more concerned about the regional rural banks, which are partly owned by the states, partly owned by sponsor banks, and their digitization, computerization. Therefore, if they didn't have it, extending phone bank facility, banking facility on the phone, not the phone banking of the UPA era. So for banks to produce internet banking facility, unless their computerization happens, it won't work out well. There, I still think there's a lot of work still pending, and DFS is quite aware of it. However, I take this opportunity to remind Secretary DFS again to ensure that he would look at the computerization, digitization, provision of internet banking, therefore having the connection with the optical fibers of all rural, regional rural banks and also of cooperative banks. Otherwise, I might sound a bit disjointed. I want to go back to that line that Minister Tomar made. There was a time when you didn't have enough money for giving Kisan credit cards, or even if the cards were available, there wasn't enough money provided. Well, I was very happy to hear him say, today for the Kisan credit cards, which came into existence during Sri Atal Bihari Vajpayee's time, there's enough and more money available. Money is not the shortage. It is more a question of being able to access farmers and provide them the card, get them on board into the system, and then be able to provide them the necessary term loans and be able to assist them periodically, because the inter-subvention is substantial and it should go to the farmer. So I was glad to hear him, the minister, say we should fully utilize it. And it is there that the banks, the NABARD, banks, when I say the regional rural banks and the cooperative banks, will have to get very activated. And there, if still there is some hybrid way of keeping your data, manual in some, partly in computer, partly something else, it won't serve the purpose any longer. Agricultural Ministry can come up with portals, but banks are the ones who need to give them the data. And I'm glad that Secretary Ahuja reminded me that banks will have to come up, and this I'm saying in front of this audience, by December 23, all the required data should be provided by the banks for these portals and necessary data that is required to be kept for agriculture purposes. Banks cannot any longer buy time on this. Our efficiencies are getting affected. So I would again take this opportunity to request Secretary DFS to ensure that the banks provide all the data required for this purpose. Even as he equally makes sure that all banks are going to get regional rural banks and cooperative banks get fully automated. Again, it's more like in-house stock getting done in public. I want Secretary DFS to ensure that this campaign which agriculture is starting now, from 1st October, Ghar KCC, is conducted to the satisfaction of the ministry. I want the banks to cooperate, ensure that this major campaign succeeds. Otherwise, this full utilization of the amounts given is not going to be effective at all. It's not going to work out. So, Ghar KCC campaign, which starts from 1st October, I assure Agriculture Minister Narendra Singh Tomar that I'll ensure banks will cooperate and work together with you in making it a success. I'll quickly move on to talking about this yes tech. Yes, more from that Y, which stands for yields. I think it is, if anything, timely, but I would say it should have been there even yesterday. This country suffers for want of real-time estimates of what is getting sowed, what is the likely output. Do we really know what will be the output of wheat this year, even at the time of sowing? We can estimate the extent of land which is getting covered under the wheat. But do we know what will be the output? Do we have a real-time assessment, estimate of the crop? I understand it is being introduced for rice and wheat only now, but it is something, since it's being done with the help of ISRO and also ICAR, this is something which will have to get ramped up to cover other crops as well as soon as possible. Particularly Dalhan and Tilhan, I would want this to be implemented at the earliest. This country has been importing pulses, and we scramble sometimes when the shortages come before us much late in the day. If only we have an assessment, real-time assessment of what is the extent getting sowed, even at that time an estimate of likely output, we'll be much better placed to plan in advance that if there's going to be a shortfall, we'll know where to get the dalhan from. Because not all dals are available from the same country. You will have to scramble from Myanmar to some of the African countries, and of course Canada, because the split pea of some sort used to come from there. But not every year do we want to import, because we also want to ensure our farmers get the clear indication that they sow, they go for harvest, and at that time, because the country feels there's a shortage, we go about importing, thus bringing the farmer's price down. That doesn't do good business. We cannot bring the price of the farmer for his produce in the last minute after he sows his crop and is about to harvest, just because at that time we get an assessment or an estimate saying this year it is going to be in a shortfall, we need to get it imported. The moment the word import comes in, the first thing which happens is the price that the farmer has to sell his produce crashes. So in order to avoid this kind of a inevitability, which is not very pleasant, this kind of a real-time portal, the Yes Tech, should as much as possible cover all those essential crops where we also need to be Atmanirbhar. So I would say kudos, congratulations, all my appreciation that you've come up with something like this for wheat and rice, but I want it for dalhan and also for tilhan. We are one of the largest importers of edible oil. We need to become self-sufficient in that. And there are now missions where you're having palm mission in the Northeast so that we get the palm oil, which we largely import, and all other oil seeds, I would think. So the speedier implementation of that for covering other crops would help the economy much better so that we can plan our imports if we still need it, ensure that the farmer doesn't suffer because of our policy to import or export. And once we get the real-time data, your policy, I heard you say, it helps in Fasal Bima. That is only a collateral. I want it to help me in policy making. I want it to help me to know how much will I have to give for the farmer for his toil. in terms of minimum support price or in terms of procurement of how much quantity I need for the buffer and so on. So this yes tech need not be restricted only for planning of Fasal Bima, but actually it will help in policy planning on a larger level, whether it is for crop, whether it's for import, whether it's for the price we pay for the farmers, or whether it is for us to know what kind of impact it will have on these crops when they come to the market itself. So congratulations for bringing yes, but speedily spread it out to cover other. And the last thing, all derived out of the various presentations that I've seen. The Fasal Bima Yojana was at a time, say 4-5 years ago, a bit worrying story. Because you thought the moment it was made voluntary, farmers would get out of it and nobody would want to come in. But because of the tweakings that you've done to the scheme, it's good news that many of them who are not part of the KCC, who are not getting loans from the bank, are now coming over to get themselves covered under Fasal Bima Yojana. I think a very big data point that Sri Narendra Singh Tomar said during his speech, and I appeal to the media who are here, who cover the Finance Ministry, who cover Agriculture Ministry, to pay attention to that one data point which Minister Tomar said. And don't quote my numbers. I heard him and he said it in Hindi. My numbers in Hindi are pathetic, but I will give you what he roughly said. He said 29,000 crores was the amount which was as a result of insurance. But when farmers had to receive payments where the claims had to be fulfilled, there was a disaster in the crop here, there was a damage somewhere else, there was a flood third place. And the farmer came with his claim saying, hey, pay me my insurance. That amount is over 1,20,000 crores. 40,000. 1,40,000 crores. Now, if I've heard Minister Tomar say that today farmers who are not even part of the KCC, who are not getting loans from the bank, are also willing to participate, and they are coming in big numbers to get covered under Fasal Bima Yojana. It is because of this performance of the department ensuring that the insurance companies pay the farmers the rightful claim, and that is more than 5 times. And this kind of a performance, because of the way in which the ministry has worked together with the farmers, the stakeholders, equally the insurance companies, because their business model will also have to be good enough for them to continue in it. So I appreciate Minister Tomar and his team for this excellent work, for bringing in technology, not just for getting data, but also making sure the agriculture sector in India becomes a forward-looking, technology-enabled, more friendly and also accessible to the farmers, making sure there is a synchrony between the banking sector and the department and the farmers. All this is good augury. I congratulate the minister, and of course, he's lucky he's got 2 ministers of state who are both also very rurally linked and connected people. Shobhaji and Kailashji, both in their respective states, are very closely tied up with agriculture. You would have seen both of them going into the fields and working with the farmers to understand, not just for a photo op, but genuinely being very sincerely there. Now, if that's the case with the ministers, I'll also sort of say with a certain sense of pride that Agriculture Ministry today is lucky also because they have good secretary, and also Ritesh's performance in terms of the presentation that he made was so good. Secretary Manoj Ahuja, I've had I made his life quite miserable by asking a lot of questions during the inter-subvention meetings. But he's a very patient and very hardworking person who gets into the detail, comes back with more information. And therefore, a team like this, which works in synchrony, can actually deliver, and that's what we are seeing today. So thank you very much for having me here today, and I wish you all the very best.